Hello, everybody. We are going to talk about the next part in the statistics project, which is going to be actually two of the assignments on the original statistics project sheet. So we're going to talk about the frequency distribution table and other graphical displays and descriptive statistics. So it's these two assignments for the statistics project. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to create three charts or graphs. One of those charts or graphs is the frequency distribution of your data. And I'm going to actually talk about this first, even though it's listed third here. And the frequency distribution is what you're going to make by hand. So I would advise making that by hand, going back to your frequency distribution notes, and putting it in a spreadsheet that looks like this. So this is the spreadsheet that I have for my data, which was about bowling scores. So this is just the example that I'm going to refer to as I make the graphs and charts. Now, I have 5 classes in my data set. When you choose the number of classes that you want, I would advise to choose at least 5 if you are able to. That way you can get a good shape and see what the shape of your data is. But for most of us, 5 or 6 classes or 7 classes would probably be best. But it just depends on your data set. Your data set might be a little bit weird looking and you might need several more classes. I would highly discourage, though, going anything less than 5. Sometimes you have to use 4 classes, but if you can go more than 4, then that would be great. And that's what's best. So you have to find the class width and divide that, find the class width by taking the number of classes that you want and then coming up with your class limits, then getting the frequency of each class, midpoints, relative frequency, and cumulative data. So this is just finding the frequency distribution. I did this by hand again. The computer doesn't do this for you. There's some programs that will do this for you, but unfortunately we're not going to go through those. So you're going to have to do this by hand and then just put it in a spreadsheet like I have here. And I'm going to be using Google Sheets because it's a free program. Excel is also used, and I'll post directions, not a video, but just written instructions on how to do that, do the same stuff in Excel. But what we're going to talk about first is how do you make a histogram, a histogram in Excel, or excuse me, Google Sheets, and a frequency polygon in Excel or Google Sheets, and you're going to put those and copy and paste those graphs in a paper of some kind. Okay, and that's what you're going to turn in for your assignment. So basically, for the first assignment, for this first part, you have 3 graphs or charts. You have the frequency distribution, which you do by hand, actually. You don't do that in the computer. That's what I just showed you. So you're going to have the frequency distribution. You're going to have the histogram of your data. And then you're going to have another graphical display. Now, I would advise, I'm going to show you how to do a frequency polygon or a frequency polygon or a cumulative frequency graph, an ogive. You can also do a stem and leaf plot. I'm not going to show you how to do that in here, but there's instructions to do that in the file. Or if you know how to make another graph or you see another graph that looks cool, after you do a couple of these, it's pretty easy to like fiddle with it and see what graph you think works best for your data. So if you want another graphical display other than that, that's fine. But you need the frequency distribution chart and you need the histogram. Everybody needs to have those. The third one is really up to you, and I'll show you a couple of options that you can do. All right, so after you make the frequency distribution right here, you're going to use this to make the histogram. So to make the histogram, what you're going to do is you're going to click on Insert Chart. And then after you click on Insert Chart, you may I got something that said no data. Now, if you have something selected or if something weird is happening here, you may have bars that are already in this box, and that's okay because you can delete them. So the first thing that I like to do is I'm going to go to Data Range. And what data? So the data is the frequencies. And make sure you highlight the frequency title because that tells the computer will include that. And these are the heights of my bars, right? Because in a frequency histogram, these are the heights of my bars. And they also give you a nice legend here. You actually don't need you don't need the legend, so you can just do none for that because you don't have multiple types of bars. Okay, so you can customize it and just say position none. And if we go back to data, we also need an x-axis, right? So the x-axis is the, you could do class or you can do midpoints. I prefer midpoints, but it's up to you. And it tells you where the graphs are, or where the number ranges are here. And I'll just show you if you do, if you want to edit this, let's do class and see what this looks like. Maybe this looks better. Yeah, this is actually centered underneath the bars. So actually I'm going to do the class because that actually looks a little bit better to me anyway. Okay. All right. And so this is our bare bones of our histogram here. And we need a chart title. So mine's about bowling scores. Make sure you have a specific title that's related to you. So we have bowling scores. And then we have a legend. Oh, we don't want the legend. We want axis titles. All right. So we can have chart titles. So that was the chart title. If we click on this and click on horizontal axis title, we can get a horizontal axis title. So these are actually the score, the bowling scores, bowling score ranges. And then the vertical axis title is the frequency. Okay, and you can customize it as you want. You don't have to have the color blue. You can have many things. I like to center my title. That looks a little better. Okay, and that's basically a histogram. That's all there is to it. So pretty simple. And you're going to copy and paste this in a document. All right. So before we do that, though, let's actually talk about a couple other graphs. So the next graph is the ogive. Now for the ogive, what I recommend is, so this is the ogive graph. I'm just going to type this here just so you know what I'm talking about. And for the ogive graph, you may remember that the class, we actually use the class boundaries. And so the boundaries are the numbers of the class without forming gaps between them. So my class boundary actually starts at 145.5, 169.5, 193.5, 217.5, 241.5, and 265.5. And that's because those are all the numbers that are in between each of these classes. That I have for bowling scores. And then we have, if you remember for an ogive, that's cumulative frequency on the vertical axis. Now, because it's an ogive, cumulative frequency always starts at 0. And then we use the cumulative frequencies that we have over here. And we can copy and paste that over. And that's what it should be. So you always start at 0. So the first class boundary is at 0 because remember, for class boundaries, we start at there's no bowling scores that are below 145.5 in my data set. Okay, and that's why we start at 0. And if we do this correctly, the chart should start on the horizontal axis. So very similar thing, we can insert a chart, but we're not going to do a column chart now. We're going to do a line chart, and our chart data range is now going to be the cumulative frequency. So that looks pretty good. And the x-axis is going to be the class boundaries. So that looks pretty good as well. And once again, we can customize. We can do legend. We don't have to have a legend because we only have one line. And then for our titles, we can do bowling scores, or even be more specific, ogive 4 bowling scores. And then for horizontal axis, these are the actual, that's the bowling score. And then for the vertical axis, we have the cumulative frequency. Okay. And because I'm very particular, I do not like that left justified title, so I'm going to center the title. And there we go. Super simple. Okay, so yeah, so we have the histogram. And by the way, these bars aren't touching on the histogram, which kind of bothers me actually a little bit. But for our purposes, I mean, it's fine for what we're doing. It's an easy way to make a chart and a graph, and this is also an easy way to make a graph of your data. Okay, the last graph I'm going to talk about is a frequency polygon. And the frequency polygon uses the class midpoints and the frequency. But remember, the frequency polygon has to start and end on the x-axis. So for the frequency, we actually start at 0. Then I'm just going to copy and paste the frequencies over here. So we are going to copy the frequencies over here and paste them. And we have 0. So this makes the line start on the x-axis and end on the x-axis. And then we have the class midpoints. But the class midpoints have to line up with their respective frequencies. So what do I put? What midpoints do I put before the first midpoint and after the last midpoint where these zeros are? Well, what's our class width? In my case, my class width was 20, looks like 24, because every time I add 24, I get to the next number. So if I subtract 24 from 157.5, I will get 133.5. That sounds right, right? 24, yeah. And then if I add 24, I will get 277.5, I believe. Okay. And now, if I go to Insert Chart, the frequency polygon is also a line. The range is the frequency, and the x-axis is the midpoints, and we can customize, and we see that we, by the way, we see that we start and end on the x-axis, right? If you did not put these, if you did not put these zeros here for the frequency, then it would just be a floating line, and that's what we don't want to happen. Okay, and then we can again, we can get rid of this legend, so it looks like that. Chart title, so this is a frequency polygon of bowling scores, and then we can change the horizontal axis to actually the bowling scores, and then we can change the vertical axis to frequency. Okay, and that is how you make each of the graphs for the project. So once again, we begin by starting with the frequency distribution, and then using that frequency distribution we can use to make the other 3 graphs. Okay, you do not need, you need to include your frequency distribution, you need a histogram, but you only need one of these 2, or you could pick another graph. You know, if you click on Insert Chart, there's other options. For example, there's area charts. You probably won't use the area charts, but there's pie charts. If you want to visualize a part of a whole in your data, sometimes that's useful. But for quantitative data, which is what you should have anyway, pie charts typically aren't that useful. But occasionally I see a pie chart. There's also like candlestick charts, which are basically vertical box and whisker charts. So, you know, there's other things that you can do, but that's basically it. So if you have any questions, then please let me know.